Hello beautiful people, my name is Venti and today I'm bringing you my January reading wrap-up. Given the state of things in the US and in the world at large, January has felt like it's lasted about 84 years, and that might be why I managed to read a total of 10 books this past month. The dilation of time is one hell of a drug. Regardless of how difficult everything else has been, reading has been one of my consistent joys, and I'm excited to share with you what I felt about the things that I've been reading. However, I would feel remiss if I hadn't at least made some sort of a mention of the things that were going on, so please check out my description box below for ways in which you can, if you feel so moved, help the world be a little less bad and be a little kinder to our fellow global citizens. Hopelessness is by far one of the most powerful tools of the people who would like to do you wrong. So I think it's really important to keep that hope and keep kindness alive and build community wherever you can. And let's let this be the last thing I have to say about it on this platform. If you are a bigot, you are not welcome here. You can see yourself out. I don't miss you. If you think you're not a bigot, but you are okay with bigotry happening around you, you are a bigot. You also can be shown the door. And to all the rest of you, welcome or welcome back. I am so happy you're here. And without further ado, let me share with you what I've read in this past month. I opened my 2025 reading year by reading A House with Good Bones by, obviously, T. Kingfisher. This book follows a young woman who, after the collapse of her relationship, moves back in with her mother into her childhood home. She's painting walls beige, she's putting up photos of like old Confederate family members, and is otherwise acting in ways that match less with her preferences and match a lot more with our protagonist's awful grandmothers. And as things move on, the house seems increasingly haunted, and our protagonist needs to figure out how to save herself and her mother from regressing into this awful mire that was created around this house many generations ago. I've just really been enjoying T. Kingfisher's backlist, and I'm excited to read even more of her going forward. I think her horror is really approachable in that it's not like visceral in the ways that will make you sick, but still very much gets into like body horror and psychological elements in ways that really work for me. I really enjoy horror elements when they are born of nature but have been perverted, sometimes through contact with humans. And I like an antagonist in a horror that is not evil and like mean and out to get you so much as it doesn't care that you exist and it's just trying to continue to thrive on its own. But what I really love about T. Kingfisher books is that the protagonists who survive her horror novels are ones who maybe have their toe dipped into the supernatural but are mostly like pragmatic and keep their wits about them. And most importantly, they stay alive by ensuring that the bonds that they make with others are strong, and those are the things that ultimately push them through. I really liked in this story in particular the way that T. Kingfisher used that intergenerational trauma and the sort of disappointed rage of a bygone era where there was very much a hierarchy of people stood at the root of what created the horrific beings, and setting that all against the backdrop of rural North Carolina was, I think, especially poignant. I think using a rage against a system that you feel is against you and one that you cannot win in, and turning that into a cruelty that you then push outward, is a really powerful vehicle by which the themes of horror come about, and I think T. Kingfisher does that beautifully. I also just thought that the concept of underground children was really creepy, and seeing them didn't make them less horrific, which is usually what happens to me when I read or see a horror thing. Like the moment the monster is shown on screen, all of my like anxiety of the unknown goes way down. But these, upon seeing them, I did not feel more secure having the knowledge of what they were. I felt like equally horrified. Yeah, so well done, T. Kingfisher. Thanks for another sleepless night. Following that, I read Shauna Lawless's The Children of Gods and Fighting Men. This is the first book in her Gale Song saga. These books take place during the Viking invasion of Ireland, but in a sort of fictionalized version thereof, where in addition to, regular human people, there are two races of magical beings who are in conflict. There are the fire-wielding Fomorians, who aren't immortal but are gifted with incredibly long life and have control over the element of fire. And then there's a faction of sort of druid-like people called the Tuatha De Danann, and I'm so sorry about that pronunciation. In the former camp, we have a woman named Gormfla, who is one of the last of the Fomorians. Her line will die basically with her if she does not have a child who also is born with Fomorian powers. And rather than following her mother's command of leaving her mortal son basically to his own devices and letting him die and basically trying again to have a child, she decides that she's going to protect this boy that she loves very much and get him basically on top of the world by whatever means necessary, even when those means cause damage and destruction to our other faction. Enter Fodla, a healer and who is one of these sort of druid-like people whose sister got pregnant with a human mortal man, and that's a big no-no and a taboo in her culture. But when her sister is exiled after having this kid, she is given a mission by the leaders of her group, basically to get this child into a powerful foster home so that they can have some sort of political machinations going on around the mortals as well. Basically, there's not enough of either of these magical people to create any great influence on the mortal world, and they have to sort of use some people as pawns and basically act as pawns themselves to the higher ups of their communities in order to win factions and basically win Ireland. I was really a fan of how Lawless's grasp of Irish history wove itself into this novel, and the ways that some of the less savory things about human history, threats of patriarchy and warfare and famine and illness, were tied into this world of magic, and the magic was never so OP that the other threats were cheapened in any sort of way. I feel like everything kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. I also really appreciated that our two female leads, despite being part of these long-lived races, they had such human stories. Gormla, as kind of awful as she was, and as much as I wouldn't personally have made some of the choices she did, I very much understand her feelings of vulnerability. She's had to live amongst the mortals basically to keep herself and her people any sort of fighting chance of staying alive, and she's existing in a place where autonomy as a woman is essentially a laughable concept, despite being the most powerful and possibly the most intelligent and informed person in the room. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to live under. Her only sort of avenue for maintaining any sort of power for herself was to advance her male progeny and hope that he cared enough about her to take her with him. And yes, while that led her to sort of be a toxic boy mom, I understood and I empathized even with some of her decisions, awful as they were. I don't like her. I think she's a good character. And as sort of her counterpoint, we have Fadla, who's a real moral center of the story, who, despite her people's insistence that she not care for mortal beings and that she view them as lesser in certain ways, finds her way to sort of deprogram herself about the belief that human men are violent and terrible and will hurt you when they get the chance, and instead engages with people on an individual level and finds herself just falling in love with these people that, as far as her upbringing goes, she shouldn't have anything to do with in the first place. The story wasn't without its problems. I think that because of so much ground that Lawless had to cover, a lot of things felt a little bit rushed in terms of pacing, so we didn't necessarily get as much characterization as I would have loved for some of the side characters, but given how many that there were, and given the sort of Game of Thrones-like size of the cast of characters, that would have been a hard ask, and the book was already like 500 pages to begin with. So I really kind of just have to trust that in the future books that will sort of get fleshed out a little bit more. But my overall takeaway with this book was just delight. This is what I wanted Marion Zimmer Bradley's Mists of Avalon to be when I first read that. A sort of very female-forward, sort of woman's point of view centric tale of a time when that just wasn't really done. And I just found the writing to be really smooth and clean. Overall, I think it was a really great start to the series, and I will be reading more from this as soon as I can get my hands on book 2. Which, wait, I think I own book 2. I thought I owned book 3, but I actually got book 2 at Worldcon. So I can start reading this basically now. Oh, it's so good to have free will. Following that, I read Orconomics by J. Zachary Pike, and you guys, I got emotionally by the D&D satire book. I did not expect to get got by the D&D satire book. I signed up for a silly goofy time and apparently missed the point where Mr. Pike said, oh, all of these fun goofy things that you're laughing at, they have consequences that will hurt you. What this book is ultimately is a critique of late stage capitalism and the way that it devalues people's lives, people's labor in the dogged pursuit of making sure that wealthy people's bottom line never gets harmed. And I really got. I was expecting that I would just have like a fun little giggle, like, ha ha ha, the non-combatant bad guys get their NPC papers, and that's how heroes know not to kill them. And there were enough jokes and sort of TTRPG like Easter eggs happening all around me that it didn't really occur to me until pretty far through the book, hey, maybe we should think even more deeply about the fact of how fucked up it is that some people need to get NPC papers to avoid being killed just on the street to further somebody else's career advancement. I think the core of my love of this story was the characters, and more specifically the points of view that they give us into this deeply unjust world. We mainly follow a character named Gorm, who is a disgraced berserker. He used to be a really high-level adventurer, and then at one point he ran away. Basically got shunned from his clan of dwarfs, so now he's a nomad, and he got all of his hero status levels taken away and stripped from him because a hero can die on a mission, but they can never run from a mission. Otherwise, they're not like a hero anymore. Gorm was an interesting character to follow because not only as sort of a veteran of the system does he know the ins and outs, at least from an adventurer's point of view, of the system that screwed him over, but he also has, to some degree still, a desire to work within it because that's all he's ever known, and he still does want the glory that was taken from him returned to him. And he figures, I don't have to think about like what I am now and what I've learned since being kicked out if I get to go back to my old status quo. His insider status allowed Pike to give us as readers a lot of information about the world very deftly without having to dump anything new. In particular, the fantasy and like RPG tropes basically being pushed to their farthest and most intense conclusions, whether or not those are good actually for the people in the world that they live in. I really enjoyed the way that his friendship with Gleebeck the Goblin, who is a foe, a race of being traditionally would basically be fair game for any adventurer to kill. I really enjoyed how that relationship developed and how that forced Gorm to rethink all of the things that he thought were normal and fine about this world, both when he adventured in it and also now that he's sort of been screwed by it. Though perhaps more than anything, it was important to me that even at the start of Gorm's character arc, he was recognizing how bad things were for the Shadowkin and already had some inklings that he would be pushed toward the growth that he needed to have by the end of the book. I also liked the other adventures that Gorm was sort of tossed into a party with. I really enjoyed Kaitha the Elf Ranger, another washed up former hero, and the ways that she has turned to some addictive behaviors as a result of the more difficult aspects of having a job where you have to throw your body at a bigger and bigger threat. I really enjoyed the rivalry between the two mages, with the sort of intuitive side versus the learned side kind of butting at odds with one another. But I think my favorite chapters were the ones in the point of view of Poldo, who is a gnome existing in the sort of behind the scenes section where there's adventures, but then there's the people who are funded by the actual work of the adventurers, the owning class. And through Poldo's eyes, we got to see what those people were doing behind the scenes, and there was this element of dramatic irony where we knew something bad was going to happen, but our adventurers didn't know it, and it just added tension to all of their interactions in a way that was tremendously satisfying to read, but also tremendously frustrating and kept me turning pages just as quickly as possible. And for a story like this, I assumed that I'd be able to see the end coming, and to some degree I did, but I didn't really understand the extent to which it would hit the way that it did. I really did think that Pike was going to keep the satire like easy to swallow and that'd be a fun, goofy ride. But as soon as I learned that this was a 3-book series and not a standalone as I thought at first, I was like, oh, this makes sense. The intensity of what is going on makes a lot more sense, and I absolutely will be continuing with this trilogy as well. Like, it really got me. Like, I thought this was going to be some happy, forgettable, sort of middle of the road book, and it turned into something that I'm still thinking about, which is just really exciting. I love when a book surprises me like that. Following that, I read The Cousins by Karen M. McManus. This is another author whose backlist I'm getting through, but unlike T. Kingfisher, I know that when I sign up to read a McManus title, it's truly just to have a fast, quick story that's gonna like keep the melodrama and the engagement really high, but that I'm probably not gonna be thinking about too much after I finish it. I always know that I'm gonna have fun with a McManus title. As the title suggests, this book follows 3 cousins, Aubrey, Millie, and Jonah, as they're invited to their estranged grandmother's basically manor house / hotel on this island in New England to work for a summer. When their parents were in their late teens, this grandmother basically disowned all of them. They were kicked out of their childhood homes. They were left without access to the wealth and the estate of the house, and the grandma's essentially become a recluse, and nobody's really seen or heard from her since that day. So it comes as a surprise when she reaches out to these cousins, and the 3 of them agree, with more or less pressure from their parents who are trying to get back into grandma's good graces, to go over for the summer and establish a relationship with this woman that none of them have really had any sort of access to prior to this. She sort of haunted the narratives of their lives, but they've never really met her before. And they are excited to do so for a variety of reasons. But when they get there, they realize that their grandmother actually didn't invite them over, and that things with her and with this whole household and family, and frankly, this whole town that they live in, are not quite what they seem. I really love stories about the downfalls of wealthy families. Family drama is just so delicious to me when it is not my own. And I really, really enjoy the sort of like gothic themes of decadence turning into decay in the hands of people who don't know how to like keep it healthy and changing and whole. I liked each of the 3 cousins, with Aubrey being truly the sweetest moral center of all of them. doesn't even care about the money, just wants to get to know her grandma. And we have Millie, who's named after her grandma, who's an absolute shit stirrer and just like wants to get things done and figure out what's going on. And then we have snarky kind of dickhead Jonah. And despite the three of them not really having seen each other since pretty early childhood, I really enjoyed watching the patterns into which the three of them fell and the relationships that developed between them as they were trying to figure out what was going on with grandma and the town. Where it fell apart for me a little bit is the kids didn't really do much investigating personally. Information kind of fell into their laps while they were having drama between themselves. And with a story like this, I want a protagonist who is a little bit more proactive in the search for information. I kept reading this because it was told in sort of dual timelines where we also got the cousins' parents' points of view from when they were teenagers. So the reveal of the story was still happening at like a pretty steady clip for me as a reader, even if in the sort of present day timeline with the teens, things were happening kind of slower and they weren't actually doing any of the investigation themselves. But those ending twists in classic McManus fashion were really over the top and incredibly fun. And by the time I got to that last little section of the book, I was just flipping pages as fast as can be. I really enjoyed and felt that the story was fair in the way that it ended. Like there was an element of schadenfreude to my ending, absolutely, for some of the characters, and for others it was very much like the real wealth is the family we made along the way. And that's saccharinely sweet, and regardless, reading the cousins was an absolutely fun way to spend a day. Following that, I read the graphic novel Pixels of You. This was written and illustrated by Yuko Ota and Ananth Hirsch. This story follows two young women, a human girl named Indira and an AI robot named Fawn, who are both interning at this art gallery and who both like to do photography for themselves. The two butt heads a tremendous amount, and the gallery leader, to prevent this fighting from going on and ruining her gallery, says, okay, the two of you need to work together on your photography and create like a gallery exhibition together, or else you're both out of here. So these two reluctant allies have to go out and figure out how to resolve their differences in order to create this. And as they do, they find they have a little bit more in common than not and grow to fall in love with one another. And it was just a really sweet story. I really liked both Indira and Fawn, with the former having a far more like chip on her shoulder attitude, and any sort of internalized ableism and technophobia that she had was sort of made sensical by the newness of AI and the way that its creation was sort of done on the back and at the expense of brown people, people of color, people like her, who are often kind of screwed in the name of progress. And on the other hand, we have Fawn, who is one of the first of these AI robots who has taken on a sort of more human appearance rather than a very like mechanical one, kind of to fit in and to lower the amount of sort of technophobia that she faces on a day-to-day basis. But because of her sort of in the middle appearance, other robots kind of look down at her and think that she thinks that she's better than them. But she has such like a joy for life and a really unique perspective on this world that she wasn't born into but was made into. And I just really love a character who has so much love for a world despite people from both sides of it telling her she's not welcome in it. I think that that sort of bravery is always wonderful to see. I really enjoyed their sort of rivals to lovers arc, but like with many graphic novels, I really just wish we had more of a page count so that we could have spent more time watching that happen. I really was intrigued by the premise of the two of them having to make art together, because to make art, you sort of need to pour your soul into a thing, and to sort of be that vulnerable with somebody who you on the surface don't like very much is, I think, a way to pretty well fast track any sort of intimacy, or to demonstrate that it is impossible to make that art when that intimacy hasn't arisen naturally. And we didn't really have much room for them to make art together. We got a lot more just them interacting, which is also lovely, but it's not what I wanted, especially because that art, that sort of baseline connection and understanding of this is how we want to create a thing for the world to perceive us as, is the thing that drew them proximally together in the first place. I did really like the side characters that we got, particularly Fawn's parents, who don't quite understand the way that she wants to fit into this world, but are 100% down to support. And I thought it was really lovely the way that when Indira went to Fawn's place and met them, that they did their absolute best to make Indira feel welcome and at home at their home. I was also a big fan of the sort of scene break pages where you sort of get like a black page and then just like white text over the top of it, which contrasted with the lovely dreamy pink and purple and blue vibes of the rest of the color palette of the book. But on these scene break pages, we'd get like little quotes and like tiny little quips about the way that AI rose, like the history of it in this world and how it came to be as commonplace a thing. And as the story went on, those hinted more and more at the complicated implications of such a thing. Like, naturally, it's going to be inherently complicated to integrate essentially a whole new, like, species or race of being when that species' consciousness developed from a deeply biased computer program made most often to favor the white, the straight, the cis, the het, the able-bodied, and the wealthy. And the progression of those quotes made the reveals about what happened to Indira and created her sort of attitude toward the world at large make a lot of sense. However, again, it was short enough that I feel like we didn't really get to dive into those like really deep, meaty themes as much as I personally would have liked to. Which doesn't mean that I didn't have an absolute blast with this book. I absolutely did. I love a story where two girls kiss at the end of it. I think that's always really sweet. And I think that for what it was done quite well. And I really, really responded to both the art style and the way that it integrated so well into a story, particularly one about visual art and the way that the characters' points of view created something beautiful. I will definitely be on the lookout for reading more from this author and artist, and I hope they collaborate again in the future. I think they're a wonderful duo. Hi pals, Editing Bendy here. So as it turns out, I'm so out of practice when it comes to reviewing books that I ended up yapping far too much. So I am going to be splitting this video into 2 parts. I'll have the second part out tomorrow on Friday. But for now, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you like me, consider subscribing to this channel. Regardless, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you with the next one very soon. Bye.